So we got the true believers here, the 4 o'clock on Friday session. So I want to say congratulations. I'll try to make this interesting and worth your while for sticking through this. Let me go back, and I don't normally do this, but I want to explain a couple things on my background. Ex-Air Force guy. So a lot of the context of, were you Army? Was that it? Navy? Well, you have to start somewhere. Who has a better golf game now, for the record? So a little bit of background, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is in the context of many of the fun things I did in the mid-'90s with what used to be called the Air Force CERT, the Computer Emergency Response Team. So I got to do network intrusion detection in the mid-'90s on the receiving end of a lot of the worldwide attacks on the AF.net or Airforce.mil network. And so a lot of the interesting kind of anomaly detection and pattern detection stuff that I'm going to talk about today is really rooted in the experiences I had back then. Now I run Denim Group with two other partners. You've probably met Dan Cornell. You've seen him running around. And run a company called Denim Group down in San Antonio who does software security stuff. Surprisingly enough, we're here at OWASP. So let's just jump right into the slides real quickly. So what I'm going to speak about today is really the whole world of what happens after you deploy an application. And I've made a central argument, forceful argument at times, that a lot of what we spend time and energy and resources on within enterprise environments is to fix the SDLC or to train up the developers or to do pen testing or to make sure the source code is devoid of vulnerabilities or at least close to that. And what I'm going to talk about today is really what you do between the time that you deploy an app and the time you end of life that app, when it's out in production. And what do you do to instrument in hooks so that you can get a little bit more context if you're being attacked? Because there's a little bit of a fire and forget mode, at least in certain enterprises. And I'm going to talk always in the context of software built in big companies, not by Adobe or Microsoft or independent software vendors. Really, if you're building big software in large-scale environments, typically web, but within the context of mobile, you could extrapolate what I'm talking about to mobile. We'll talk a little bit about kind of the target area. I'm going to blow through a handful of slides because this is OWASP, but I'm going to focus more on the application logging and context part of this session. So I've been told I've got about 30 minutes. I will try to be respectful to that and leave enough time for questions and answers. So given that we've got an intimate audience here, it's a Friday afternoon, I would ask if I don't explain something well, if you have a question, just jump up and say something. So anyhow, we'll go from there. So if you are looking at kind of the network world, for those that come from that network world or are familiar with it, I want to just draw a comparison for starts. And again, I came from that network security, network intrusion detection world. And if you're on the receiving end of an incident, or you think that you are being attacked, I mean, obviously there's nobody that announces that, but there's a couple of key things that happen. First of all, you want as much information as possible, as much information as you can. And there's not, again, somebody that's telling you that this is happening. You just start to see weird stuff. And we were talking about this earlier with Peter and crew, like kind of what's the baseline? What are the kind of things that you start off and look and understand what the base case is? So the first thing you want to do is get as much information as possible. So for those that are familiar with the security event or security incident and event management world, SIEM and SIEM, that's what this is. It's like you want to suck logs, you want the logs and the ability to kind of interpret and correlate what you're getting in a relevant amount of time. And if you've done this well, you start to get patterns and determine patterns and identify patterns. And that's what's happened in the network world. And I would argue that the network world is exceptionally mature in this area. There's a lot of resources, a lot of product in this world, and a lot of, like if you've heard of these vendors, some of them are downstairs, most of them are at RSA and others. But there's a built-in constituency and a built-in set of people that know how to do network intrusion detection. And I would compare this drastically to the world of applications. When, in fact, if you're in an operational environment, there isn't a distinction. If you're being attacked, you want the network information, but you also want the application layer information too. The big difference is, if you're building custom applications, that information is rarely presented to you. Does that make sense? I mean, if you have a custom dev team and custom dev effort, they're not coming to you saying, hey, here's the information we're trying to expose to your security monitoring tool. They don't talk that way. They don't think about it. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So how many people are familiar with the Gartner group Magic Quadrant? If Gartner says it, I believe it, that settles it, right? You know, they've been anointed. They're in the Magic Quadrants. Every product marketing person on the planet is trying to get to the upper right corner, not in the bottom right-hand corner, bottom left-hand corner. So I guess if you're, I won't name out these guys, that's bad, that's good up there. IBM's up in the upper right-hand corner for our friends from IBM. The point here is, if you notice, there's lots of dots. There's lots of companies. This is a mature marketplace. There's lots of people that do security event and security incident event management. And so this is stuff that if you went back to the late 90s, and you know, there are companies that started to do this and started sucking logs, and oh gosh, we get this and get that. But so they're, you know, kind of the basics in blocking and tackling in this area was like, you know, what happened, when, and how, but in a format that I can then, you know, obviously import in a predictable way, structured data that I can import in a predictable way, that can go into these systems. Then I can start to understand, and I can either turn them up or turn the gain up or down during certain incidents. And when we're in the Air Force, we would look at certain types of TCP ports within certain systems, and if we perceived activity, suspicious activity, we would turn up the gain. We would start to log more information and more ports. We looked at systems around that to see what, you know, the DNS is doing at the same time. We'd look at more context. And so that's what you're wanting on the network side. But unfortunately, obviously, we're here at OWASP, and I won't really hit you on the head about this, but I mean, applications obviously are a preferred area of attack, if not the preferred area of attack if you're at OWASP. And so you've got a lot of folks that are worried about this. So if you go back to this world right here, they're getting a little bit more app aware, but it's still a learning curve. They're still trying to solve big problems in the network world of, you know, you go to the Air Force now, they're worried about gigabit Ethernet monitoring. They're worried about big data, big stuff, correlation across multiple bases. They're not worried about, they're less worried about what's happening at layer 7. So the challenge there is, I mean, you throw in the issue of the division between the dev group and the security group in most places, and you have this real big challenge. So you know, I'm going to blow through this real quickly, but you know, essentially injection vulnerabilities change the you know, or just an example of how the network side of the house typically doesn't monitor, manage, or worry about this stuff. And you know what SQL injections do? I don't have to explain this to you. Bad things. You can drop databases. Again, network intrusion detection stuff is starting to pick up some of these capabilities, but for the most part, they're not. But so the main thing here is that we've got to understand is the network side of the house is focused on big things, and then the application side is a little bit different. So what happens in the application side is the chasm that exists between the dev groups typically and the security groups is really pronounced in this area. This is changing a little bit if you heard from Jason Chan and what they're doing with DevOps, and if you heard Josh Corman and Rugged, and kind of this more kind of near real-time production world. Okay, it's a little bit changing, but I would argue that outside the earliest adopters, that they're rare. I mean, for most places, you still have a centralized security team, maybe a centralized person that worries about software security, typically a dude, sorry, and then but then you have multiple dev teams that might be in different locations, different management. They typically report up through different groups. And so this chasm really hurts in this particular area, because what happens is they're obviously building enterprise software. They don't think about security. They only do it if it's an afterthought, or if they're in a banking or the most security conscious financial organizations. But the real big point on this slide is if they do logging, are they worried about this at all? They are worried about focusing on debugging broken software, right? So if you go to a developer and say, hey, I'd like you to add some logging, what do you log for? When you build an app, you're really looking to log to debug the app if it crashes in a weird state or if it does something weird. You want to know what, you want to be able to essentially figure out after the fact what happened and how I can fix it as quickly as possible. So does everybody here understand, like, you have to, I mean, like when you're building custom software in an enterprise, in order to put out that information for debugging purposes, you have to write that in. You have to basically create that. It isn't created by definition. So compare this with software security security products. They, almost all of the firewall, probably all of them now, all of the security products by definition send information out in a structured way because that's what they do. If you're building a security product, you're not going to build a security product that doesn't send information out to a SIEM or SEIM. That's what they do. But if you're building an enterprise e-commerce engine, that isn't at the top of your list. You're looking to debug it in case an order gets confused or there's shipping problems. You're looking to essentially debug and fix the problems with the application itself, maybe not the security stuff. So the real big thought on this slide is if you don't articulate what you want logged, it isn't magically going to be logged, if everybody understands that. Again, if you're in custom environments, they're by definition custom, and if you're not being invited to those meetings, you're not contributing or saying, here's what I need, and here's what it needs to look like, and here's how frequently I need it, they're going to do what they need to do and nothing more than that. So that's a real big challenge. So in most enterprise environments, the fidelity of logging for security and application security attack purposes is dramatically lower. So I'm just going to give you a quick example, a couple of code level examples of something here where, if you write this and you write off to print this particular command, you're getting information out, but it doesn't tell you anything. In this instance is even worse, where if you're logging something, somebody tries to log in, you're appending like the password to a particular log. That's even dumber. So it's one thing to not get the information, but it's another thing to log, like inject a password or PII or a social security number into a log. Not logging bad, logging creating a security problem in your logs is even worse. And then even worse example, like that. We've seen this. We don't see it frequently anymore, but this is an example. Like, hey, I want to know if that person didn't put in the credit card number correctly. Well, that's a thing that maybe a developer would like to do to debug, but bad. So, the first and foremost thing is don't do logging and create more security headaches by definition. You don't want to do that. And you need to think back. You need to sit down and work with the development team, or the development team folks need to work with you to figure out what do I need during an attack. And you have to do it in a human interpretable form. That's the other thing. When you're in the middle of an incident, part of the challenge is to detect the anomaly, and by that, what you're doing is you're trying to get rid of all the chaff. You're trying to understand what is that key thing that jumps out at me, and half the battle, if not more than half the battle, is to throw everything out that doesn't matter to me. So in the case of applications, there are definitely formats out there that are understood and predictable, and we'll go through that, but things that can be sucked into your security event manager. And then the key thing here is that the developers, obviously, and security people talk in different contexts. They talk in different languages, and one of the things that we see all the time is if you talk to a developer, they don't understand what a application vulnerability is typically. They'll understand what a software defect is, or a security software defect, but they use different language. So part of it is creating the translation table or the translation mechanism, so you can talk to them saying, this is what I need, this is what it looks like. And then the last thing is, do it in a way that is trusted. So I'll just tell you a quick war story. On our side, we typically don't do, as a company, incident response. We try to run away from incident response because it's highly disruptive and not fun, and but we walked into a particular client about 3 or 4 years ago, and they said, hey, we've got a real big problem. Our CEO and CIO had their Outlook profiles deleted. And out of 15,000 people, I was like, well, that's probably not a random event, right? The CIO and the CEO. And so we started asking very technical questions like, what happened, have you fired anybody? And within like 5 minutes, they oh yeah, we fired our Exchange administrator last week, and this and that, and I was like, wow, you know, I'm going to come across as a really smart guy and say there's something related to that happened. There's your trigger event, right? And so what we figured out real quickly, though, is, and this is not a custom application, this is just like Exchange. The same administrators had Exchange and AD, you know, super user rights. So what do these crafty guys do? They flushed the logs for 72 hours. So they went in and essentially blew up the CEO and CIO's outlooks. They didn't have contacts, you know, anything, any of their stuff. But they were not sophisticated enough to do it in a way that was subtle. They just blasted the logs. So one of the things that we said to them is, we don't know who did it, but we suspect it was probably one of those guys because they didn't know how to do that in a way that didn't set off big triggers, i.e. there's missing logs for 3 days. So I asked them, you know, do you do trusted logging? So like one of the things you have to do here is to make sure you log the information off to a place that does it in a one-way encrypted fashion so that the administrators can't edit or tamper with the logs or delete them all. So, you know, if you don't tell the developers to do that, or you don't work with the developers to take those logs and do that in a way that's interpretable and trusted, if you do have an incident, they're certainly not admissible in any courtroom or any for any litigation. So that story was a very crude example, but extrapolate that to custom software as well. Like you know, where'd you save the logs? Well, they're right here, you know, right here. Well, you know, that's going to be the first thing that attackers do. They're either going to put in a rootkit and say don't log to that, or if they're sophisticated, or they're just not going to be able. You're not going to be able to tell that they're on the box. So that's the first thing. Okay, so I've already kind of mentioned this. But if you're on the security side, part of your job is to find out how to get invited to that design meeting for the new software project. You know, be it on the mobile side, be it on the website. How do you get, you know, how do you know that a new software project is being executed, and that at the design phase you can be there saying, time out, hey, this is just, you know, here's how I need our stuff, you know. Absent of that, you will not get anything. So the other side is that security operators must understand the application layer better, because they need to be able to tell what should be logged. I'll give you a great example. If you don't understand the back and forth of HTTP, and you don't understand like what is an anomaly, then that's very hard. I mean, then it's very difficult to articulate to the application team what to log. I mean, like that's the starting point. And then the other thing is developers need to understand and figure out, you know, what is meaningful and what is interpretable. I mean, how many people, I mean, I'm not a Windows developer, a desktop developer, but you know, you have Windows or you have Apple crash, and you have the option to say, hey, send this off to back to Redmond or Cupertino or whatever. I mean, obviously you don't send it, but then if you're lucky enough to get kind of that you know, like the info and look, I mean, can anybody interpret the stack trace on a Windows app and understand kind of what happened there? I mean, you do? Okay, well, hey, welcome. Well, here you go. But in all seriousness, I mean, most of us can't. And if it's a custom application that you're not familiar with, you're like, well, great, you threw me a bunch of data. What the hell am I supposed to do with this? So part of it is talking to them, saying, this is what I need. I don't need everything. I need, it came from here, this is what it looks like, in a way that is 8 or 9 fields that I can look and do a quick snapshot and say, okay, that's bad, that's good, that's bad, that's good, that's bad, that's good. Because again, once the stuff hits the fan, you can't interpret a log file. Like, thank you for sending me like a meg worth of text. I have to sit there and go through it, or, you know, grep for keywords or do whatever, but you can't, it's too late to do anything So what do you need? I'm going to dive into this. What does fidelity of security logging mean? And I'm going to start out high and get low. What, when, where, how? You know, what it was, where it came from, what port, what part of the system it accessed. Those are all important things. And the key is you may not want to know much more. So the key in logging, and this is our application intelligence, information, whatever, is to start simple and stupid and then work up from there. We see it frequently, but not as frequently as we used to. But we've been in clients where they have intrusion detection deployed. Hey, we have intrusion detection, network intrusion detection. You're like, awesome. And you look at their, ask more questions to find out they have a box, always a box, located outside the firewall. So you're like, that's awesome. You're logging the entire internet, all the attacks on the internet. And when was the last time you looked at? I mean, their logs roll over. They're basically have a device. They've checked a box. Not to pick on PCI, but I'm saying like that happens. Like if you're not looking at the information from what modest logs you have or what information you have, why on earth would you do any of this? So the first thing is look at basic information. Key events are when people are accessing the application and what part of the application. Think of, again, those are network activities, authentication, authorization, access, but look at it from the application level as well. What's being passed into the app and what's being passed out. If you were to read nothing else, there's a couple of great sources. The How to Do Application Logging Rights, a great white paper. There's also an OWASP site on this. If you do nothing else after this meeting, after this presentation, go read those two because they're exceptional. So what kind of things do you want to log? Again, starting out real simple. Maybe even you may want to pick one or two of these, and once you understand and have built them into your day-to-day tempo, because unless you've got a person or maybe have volunteered to do this yourself, don't do this unless you have somebody on at least a daily basis to say, I'm going to look at this stuff. I'm going to get my cup of coffee, I'm going to spin up my computer, and at 8 o'clock in the morning I'm going to look to see what happened the night before. Or, if you can't even do that on a 24-hour basis, don't do any of this stuff. But once you get to that, then you can start kind of amping it up and adding more things. So certainly input validation, output validation. What's coming in, what's going out. That's probably the biggest thing that you want to do. And then authentication successes and failures are multiple successes or multiple failures. Like you want to know if somebody's trying to access your stuff on the application layer. Because one of the things, like if you understand a SQL injection, part of what you're trying to do is tweak the payload to hit pay dirt. You're trying to get that payload perfect. And if you're not looking and logging this type activity at the application level, you may not get on the network level that information that says, hey, somebody's trying is doing some interesting thing at the app level. So you can go down after you've done that session management stuff, application errors and system events. Again, keep it real simple. Be able to interpret, digest, and act upon what you get, and then work from there. And then, legal and opt-ins where it matters in certain highly regulated environments, or other high-risk functionality or admin logins or failed admin logins, all those things. But start simple and go from there. And then for each event, this is a starting point, and you can turn up or turn down this. Obviously, when the event was logged, I mean, that's important. You assign a date to it, interaction, what app, what part of the app it talked to, what page, if it's a web application, from what TCP service it came from, what user ID accessed it or tried to access it, and then what type of event. So this is all from the OWASP application logging cheat sheet. Great starting point. Again, 2 documents, this and the Gunnar Peterson article. If you read nothing else, I'd recommend you do this. But okay, so now you're starting to get some certain level of information, and you can start to interpret and figure out. But you have got to tell the dev manager or the team lead, this is what I need, and I need it for these type of events over here, and nothing else to start with, and work your way up from there. Because if you don't have the information and then can't interpret it and can't act on it, it's better probably not to even look at it at that point. And I would say in most enterprise environments, I would say a good half don't do this at all. I mean, they just put it out there and they say, hey, we have a WAAF. So I'll ask the great WAAF question for the record. How many people have worked with or have WAAFs in their environments? You can raise your hands higher. How many people have, or keep them down either way, how many people have rule blocking implemented on their WAAFs? 2. Okay, so that's interesting. The reason I ask that question is a lot of people have bought WAAFs for compliance purposes, and a smaller subset have used them to block stuff or to interpret the data off of layer 7. But one argument is they are wonderful tools for doing this stuff, particularly if you didn't get these questions into the development team prior. So if you didn't ask any of these questions and you didn't get your application developers to build this stuff to kick out from the custom software systems, WAAFs become a bigger player, and we'll talk about that in a second. So this is the kind of information that you want to do, the emphasis on keeping it simple. Information never to log, another key point. This stuff sounds so blindingly simple that I'm embarrassed to even throw it out there Friday at 4:30 in the afternoon. But it's true. You don't want to log passwords. Don't want to log somebody's credit card data. Don't want to log EPI. It happens, and it happens frequently. How many folks have worked with clients or in your own environments where they use actual live data for test data? Is that bad or good? Bad, 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 bad. So you know this. So if you're doing that, is it unusual to say that this might happen? I mean, this does happen frequently. So particularly if you're in a PCI environment where you're trying to limit scope of what's in scope for PCI compliance, like why would you log this stuff to make the logs more in scope? So these are things that you don't want to put out ever. And make sure if you've got like a SharePoint environment that you're not crawling SharePoint, or if you've got Google, if you've got one of those Google appliances in your environment, that you're not like crawling these logs either, because that's when you're going to find out whether or not you did this. So, okay, so here's an example of, I'll give you a couple code snippets of where you can do that. So when, do it well. So when somebody fails to log in, you're going to escape the username, you're going to log what happened, you're going to do it over and over. And this is even better. You're going to log what happened, where it happened, and how. Again, a little bit more information. Let me go back there. But this is an example of what, like now you're starting to get a little bit of context and you're not doing dumb things. So I talked about WAAFs real quickly, and this is OWASP conference, so it's, I think the tendency is to beat up on WAAFs, but this is where there's a strong business case for web application firewalls. Even if like your audit department bought it and nobody's really looking at it, this might be a paid for and unutilized gem to do application logging. And that's because, I mean, they really give you application layer visibility that in a lot of places where you don't have it. And so you can start to see patterns of attack, particularly a SQL injection where people are tuning payloads to try to get in. That's where you can start to see. Now, I won't ask this question again, but like a lot of people have WAAFs. How many people interpret the rule, the law, the things that kick out, or the alerts that kick out of the WAAFs? Most of the time, it's a subset of people that do that. Maybe I'm looking over at you, I'm picking on you, but I mean there are fewer clients that have WAAFs that actually look at them daily and look at alerts. And alerting, meaningful log reduction and alerting and getting the thresholds for reporting are very difficult things to tune. But this is an example where I'd say most people that are PCI vendors, retail folks, they have these, and you'd be surprised that the application security folks are not tapping into that data stream. You may not be doing blocking, but you've still got access to the data. So finding out where that is and getting that information is a strong recommendation. So there's other things. So again, these are examples of I didn't get any of these requirements into the dev team. I really don't have anything. I'm just looking at what's happening in the application layer traffic. Another interesting project. How many people are familiar with AppSecUSA? Michael Coates out of Mozilla's, actually president of OWASP, was very instrumental in this, still very influential. But what AppSecUSA does is it's a framework, and it basically looks at a lot of things that never should happen in application level attacks. Like if you're starting to see certain types of activity, and I'll give you these examples. An example that has numerous probes and tries to, like I mentioned, the trying to craft a payload for SQL injection is a great example. You start to see patterns of activity. This is stuff that goes through a regular firewall as port 80 or 443 traffic that we just drop. We don't care about. It's background noise. So what AppSecUSA basically does is says there's certain types of background noise that for me is interesting and might be an alert to something weirder that I need to look at. So again, and this is something that's instrumented in application servers. And these are examples of the type of bad behaviors. There's about 50 of them. That there's a HTTP GET when you're expecting a post and the reciprocal. I mean that's unusual. That's weird. Unexpected HTTP commands. It's really essentially saying there's some things that should never happen, and if they do, I'd like to know about it. And then maybe again, that gives me the ability, that pregnant pause to go and say maybe I need to look at more stuff. Let me go look. Maybe I get the logs from my WAF once a week. Maybe just look at log in today. You're looking for indicators at the application level of somebody knocking the heck out of your application or doing certain things. The other one is, how many people are familiar with virtual patching that's out there? Okay, so virtual patching is an ability to push essentially a block on web application firewalls or some of the web smart application firewalls that essentially blocks a URL while you're fixing it, while you're fixing a vulnerable application, I should say. So one of the interesting things you can do is you can say, look, okay, there's a SQL injection at this help login or some kind of login part in the back of my site. You can push this WAF virtual patch, and it's out there. All the WAFs will tell you how many people try to hit that vulnerable site after. So now you're starting to see, okay, in my login for my HR backend portal, there was a SQL injection. Let me block that until we fix this. But wow, I pushed out this virtual patch on Monday night. There were 120 people that tried to hit that site over the weekend. Somehow somebody's aware of that now. That is more than random stuff. And it can allow you to get context of what is out on your site, what has been vulnerable, is patched in the short term, but who's trying to touch that in the interim. So there are application, like I said, aware web application firewalls that do that. Mod Security F5 and Perva, I think it's the white hat guys, push vulnerability reporting to these. I think Veracode does that. And then we, Denim Group actually released an open source tool called ThreadFix that allows you to do that import tools as well. So this is kind of, if you follow the DevOps stuff that is being kind of discussed in some of the other sessions, this is getting kind of towards that near real time world where you're like, hey, look, I have a 2-week cycle with my dev team. I can't fix something because I don't control those guys. But what I can do is I can block that or push that vulnerable site to somewhere else. And while I'm doing that, I get some information and context of who's hitting it. Was that really a problem, or is that something I should not worry about? So that's another way that you can get some level of information in deployed applications that are out there that maybe you didn't instrument this stuff in prior. So that's another stretch. So anyhow, I'm going to wrap up here with plenty of time to go here. I've got the slide deck that I'll send out. Obviously, I'm going to leave it for everybody. If you want to email me or call me or Twitter me, if you're super lonely and want to follow me on Twitter, that's me. But seriously, DM me and I'll send you the deck in PDF format. But essentially, if you had to do anything else, I would look at the Gunnar Peterson article and then also the OWASP logging cheat sheet, which is up on the phenomenal resources. Anyhow, well, I appreciate you, listening up and being the hardcore supporters here at the last. Again, DM me or email me, and I'll send you the slide deck. And if you have any questions, I'll be around. Thank you.